Welcome, dear colleagues. Welcome to this webinar entitled Openness and Open Education Practice in Distance Education. At the Commonwealth of Learning, opening up access to opportunities for learning is at the core of our mandate. Welcome to our moderator and Commonwealth of Learning Chair, Professor Geesje van der Berg, as well as the panelists, Professor Patience Kelebogile Mudau, Professor Cosmas, Maphosa, and Professor Samuel Amponsah. We are looking forward to the session. Over to you, dear moderator, Professor Geesje. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jaco, for that introduction, and thank you for this opportunity as well. And welcome to everybody, ladies and gentlemen. If it's afternoon in your country, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to this webinar, and I'm going to share my screen. Just a moment. Is it showing, Dr. Jaco?
Yes,
yes, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you. As you said, Jaco, the title of this webinar then is focusing on openness and open education practices in distance education. As you've said, Jaco, I'm not on my own, and I am honored to have three scholars with me this afternoon or today, and they all work in distance education spaces in the Global South. They have published widely and can be regarded as experts in the field, as they all fulfill leadership positions in their context. They also supervise students in the field of distance education, and in the past few years, the four of us have worked together on different levels. And I've the privilege of just briefly introducing them before I start. Firstly, Professor Samuel Amponsah is an associate professor in open distance learning and currently heads the distance education department at the University of Ghana. Samuel's primary areas of research has been adult education and open distance learning. In the past few years, he has developed a keen interest in inclusive education with a niche in visually impaired students learning online. After my introduction, he will then do a presentation with the title, How Open is Open Education? A focus on visually impaired students learning online. He will be followed then by Professor Cosmas Maphosa, who is a full professor of education management and the director of the Institute of Distance Education at the University of Eswatini in Eswatini. He holds a Master of Education in Open Distance Learning from UNISA and is in the process of submitting a second PhD, also in Open Distance Learning at UNISA. The title of his presentation will then be The Challenges of Openness in Distance Learning in a Dual Mode Institution in Sub-Saharan Africa. The last presenter, but not the least, will be Professor Patience Kelebogile, or Lebo as we know her, Mudau, and she's an associate professor in the Department of Curriculum and Instructional Studies at the College of Education at UNISA. She's involved in the coordination of the Online Teaching and Learning Certificate of Advanced Studies, which is a project between UNISA and the COL-hosted University in Oldenburg in Germany. Her research interests are academic capacity building, open education practices, and technology-enhanced learning. The title of her presentation will be Open Educational Resources in the Global South. With these few words then, welcome again from my side to this webinar, and we are looking forward to an informative and engaging session. I will start with a few introductory comments on openness in distance education, referring then to my own context. and also to the policy, our policy at UNISA, where I work. Presentations by the different presenters will then follow this. So I'll start with a question. What is openness in distance education? And I would like you just for a moment to think about this question and what it means in your context and to. I'll start with a quote then from Professor Aras Boskoert. And he says that openness serves as an indispensable ingredient in the rich recipe of human learning, development, and progress. And Professor Aras, I'm not sure if you're in the house, but thank you for a very comprehensive article, and we have put the reference in the advert to this webinar. So I would like to encourage those of you who have not read it yet and have an interest in open learning to consult this article, because it's really the most comprehensive piece of work I've seen on openness in education, and it's really an eye-opener. I've read this article, and it actually contains 54 voices or narratives or testimonials, if you like, of colleagues who are experts in the field of openness and reflecting on what openness means in different contexts. And this made me think of my own context and my own understanding of open distance learning. I've been working in open distance learning for a number of years, I think since 2002. So it's a long way in open distance learning, and we don't give it really enough thought. So after I've read this and thought about it, I'd like to share with you a few concepts that came to mind. And of course, there's not enough time to share everything, but just a few things that came to mind and I would like to share with you at this moment. And the first concept that came to mind is complexity. The complexity of the term openness cannot be underestimated. The fact that in this article of Boskoert, there are 54 narratives, and there's so little repetition in this whole article. It means that there are 54 people who have written differently on the concept of openness in education. Also, literature agrees that the term openness is simply too complex to define. No single definition is suitable to define openness in education. Yes, it's easy to say it's the opposite of closedness, but then the question comes to mind, is education is open to whom? Why is it open? How is it open? And it's heavily dependent on context as well. If we think of the internet, that's actually opened up education for us, the influence of COVID, how it has influenced the whole openness movement, how open education has become since then. And then more recently, the whole hype on ChatGPT and artificial intelligence, which has also contributed to the concept of openness and where we are going with open education. And of course, it asks us then to constantly think and rethink and realize the concept of openness and its complexity. And also the question for me came to mind, is technology at the moment the driver of openness? The second concept I'd like to briefly discuss is access. Access is almost synonym with openness, and it also links with concepts like inclusion, social justice, because it's about access to opportunities for learning. It's access to quality education, formal education, informal education, access to content. And then I think of journals, open access journals, how open content is, for example, and how it changed my personal life, how easy it is to get access to content because of these open access journals. Then access, of course, links to Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which talks of quality education for all. It talks to access to free textbooks. Of course, the OER movement is also talking to access to resources and MOOCs as well. The next concept is the multidimensional nature of open education. And this speaks to the responsibility we have specifically as institutions and lecturers to look after openness with responsible openness and sustainability in openness. It must be sustainable. The whole issue of affordability comes to mind because nothing is for free. Everything comes with a cost if it's working or monetary or whatever the case might be. Because openness is not necessarily a synonym of free education. And then the admission issue also comes to mind if you think of open education. I know UNISA speaks of responsible open admission, which I can relate to. The next concept I'd like to quickly talk about is aspiration. Openness in education is always an aspiration. We are not there. It's work in progress. It's evolving because reality changes so quickly and we have to adapt to these changes. It's future focused. We're thinking of, we want education to be open, but how are we going to get there? We haven't really figured that out. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these kinds of discussions. And then the last issue I would like to briefly talk about is it's necessary. Openness is necessary because it removes barriers to learning. It is needed for education. It's needed for an educated society. If we think of the context in South Africa, it can assist in addressing the high unemployment rate in the country. It can assist in upskilling, reskilling, lifelong learning, and also, of course, tackling the challenges of the complex society we are currently living in. So Som Naidu, another colleague of ours who's working in this field, is stating that open education is not a choice, but a basic need. So relating to the necessity of open education for us. These aspects make me think of the Commonwealth of Learning and what it is actually saying of open education, of openness in education. And I consulted a newsletter of 2016 in which the Commonwealth is declaring its viewpoints on openness, and there might be other documents where this is also stated or documented. So it's saying that openness is a way of increasing access to learning opportunities, the issue of access again. Secondly, it says openness is about flexibility and freedom to learn, to choose. Third, openness should lead to open courses and curricula. And lastly, finally, we at the Commonwealth believe that openness is about continuous improvement, and that was quite interesting to notice because it links also to the aspiration issue I spoke about. The true claim to openness can only be justified when an institution is constantly looking for ways to improve its policies and practices to provide the best service to its students. And then I will quickly then go to our own policy at UNISA. We have got an open distance learning policy, and in this policy, there's a definition of what open distance learning is then referring to. This is quite a comprehensive description of open distance learning, and I'm going to read it. It says, open distance learning is a multidimensional concept aimed at bridging the time, the geographical, the economic, social, educational, and communication distance between student and the institution, student and academics, student and courseware, and student and peers. Quite a mouthful. Open distance e-learning focuses on removing barriers to access learning, flexibility of learning provision, student-centeredness, supporting students, and constructing learning programs with the expectation that students can succeed. So this is what the policy says on what open distance learning is. However, again, to go back to the complexity of open learning and open distance learning, it comes with a few contradictions and even dilemmas, which I would like to touch on and mention. So these dilemmas I would like to share with you are not meant as criticisms at all, but it's a reminder in that distance education is actually an aspiration. It's work in progress. We are not there yet, and it's continuous improvement that is needed. Also, I've got questions here while I go through them, and I do not necessarily have the answers. And that's why these kinds of debates are needed, and they need to be ongoing to actually improve on what we are doing. So the first issue, and the bold parts are those parts that are in the policy itself. It is focusing on student support, the policy. However, on the other side, we as the university have very high student numbers, which lead to inadequate or insufficient student support in many cases. So, for example, we have got modules in our college which have more than 20,000 students. How do you adequately support students in practice, and how do you also link it then or justify it with policy which actually focuses on student support? Secondly, it's talking about removing barriers to access learning. Although it intends to move these barriers, we are still sitting with a digital divide in the country. And the digital divide is talking about access to data, access to connectivity, and even access to adequate devices. If students do not have, for example, a device that they can work on, everybody and research has actually confirmed that most students have smartphones or phones, but not all of them have, for instance, laptops. So is learning really effective, and are you removing barriers if you expect from students to complete a course on a smartphone? So these are issues that we are still grappling with and have to attend to and have to discuss. The next issue is student-centeredness. The policy is strong on how we need to move into a student-centered focus. On the other hand, well, if we really leave everything to the student, how do we ensure that they have got the digital literacy to work and do what's expected from them? How do they have the digital literacy is one thing, digital competency is actually more complex. How do we know that they are competent to do what's expected from them in a digital-driven world? And how do we bring these together? And then next point is removing barriers to access learning, it says. And on the other hand, we have intellectual property issues. At UNISA, for example, we have got a policy on intellectual property, and this leaves us with all our content still locked behind paywalls. So are we then really removing barriers to access to learning, or is there still a barrier that we have to look at? Next one is flexibility of learning provision. It also mentions, but when we look at reality, students have very strict start and end dates. This is actually applicable to undergrad students as well as postgraduate students. There's a very small period where students are able to apply for for their studies, and there's a very small period where they are able to register for their courses. Then the question comes up, is this flexible learning provision, or is it open? Is it open enough? And yeah, these are questions that come to mind. And then removing barriers to access learning, it also mentions. And then the question comes up if we have taught them, or do they have the necessary skills, and I'm referring to critical thinking skills, to if they have access to all the information, or to information, how do they distinguish between real information, applicable information, and false information, about misinformation, between misinformation and the right information or applicable. And then also the whole issue of whose information are they accessing then. So these issues are some of the things that in the short period I would like to share with you, to also reiterate or confirm the complexity of openness. With openness then comes definitely responsibility, and it's not closed or open or straightforward. So in conclusion then, I'd like to share with you a few concluding remarks. First one is that policies might be in place for openness in education or open distance learning. However, in practice, it's not always that easy and that straightforward, and these policies do not necessarily work that well in practice. And then also, if we look at technologies, it might be that technologies have made more progress toward openness in education than our policies are able to make. So in conclusion then, I leave you with a comment from a co-chair of the Commonwealth of Learning, who said that instead of aspirational openness, we should refer to education in terms of ignorance, closeness, and maybe focus on those issues. And lastly then, my question to you to think about is, what is the purpose of education? Is it there to educate a few, some? I'm not sure, I don't think so. Thank you, colleagues. This is my contribution, and I'm going to stop and hand over to Professor Samuel for his presentation. Thanks, Prof. Sam.
Thank you so much, Prof. And for that insightful presentation, and for also the invite to be part of this very important session. I also want to express gratitude to Commonwealth of Learning for this opportunity. So in the interest of time, I will move straight to my task here. Right. So I'm going on a bit of a different direction, because my interest over the past 2 years has been on visually impaired students who study online. And so I'll present a bit of data in this presentation. So my question is, how open is open education? A focus on visually impaired students learning online, right? And I will not bore you with any conceptualizations of openness, because Prof. Van den Berg has done justice to that, and I know my co-presenters will also do that. But key takeaways, we are looking at technology, we are looking at inclusion, access, we are looking at affordability, we are looking at flexibility and freedom and continuous improvement. One key term that the literature often forgets when it comes to openness is what do you call it? Is disability. Most of the time, we take accessibility to be disability, but they are not the same. And so in our conceptualization, I always try to put it across in my writings and in my studies. Okay. So with that said, just a brief, just to give a context, it is understandable that technology, I mean, if we talk about flexibility, if we talk about openness, if we talk about freedom and access, technology inclusion in education has done a lot. It has extended the frontiers of these concepts and made it a reality. But what we need to understand is that it has also widened the digital divide across a wide spectrum of students, especially for those of us in the global south. Because I remember during the COVID-19, I was so surprised to see that when government of Ghana took studies to televisions, which we felt at least every household has a television. I was so surprised to see that there are higher education students who do not even have radio sets in their family homes, not to talk about internet and other digital devices. So when it comes to my focus, the students with disabilities, globally, I mean, I picked this literature from Global, from Goodgilman and Farah and Nami and Brown, whose work, I mean, Nami and Brown, their work focused on Ghanaians. And it is clear that these students are highly underrepresented in education and in the literature as well. So some statistics to buttress that, 8% of the students with disabilities are found in the US. In the UK, it's 14%. In Australia, it's a paltry 4%. Now, when we come to Ghana, surprisingly, there's no reliable data on such students. And when it comes to the qualities of education, the report from Senaja et al. Also collaborates that there is no research. Meanwhile, when you go to the Ghana Living Standards Survey by Ghana Statistics Authority, the last survey in 2022, it was clear that about 3% of the entire population has some form of disability. And 3 out of this 3%, that translates to almost 1 million people, suffer from visual impairments. And therefore, it is quite surprising that such a huge number, significant number, is not represented. They are not being considered in the educational landscape. And in as much as access to education is being extended to the length and breadth of the country, these people seem to be forgotten day in, day out. So I'm sharing some key global policies that talks about inclusivity that we all know. 1948, education is a right and not a privilege. UNESCO 94 Salamanca Statement, Education for All. The Millennium Development Goal 2 is sought to widen the scope of primary education. The essence is that if we provide people at the base with education, they will grow with it, and at least everybody will attain some level of education. Then what is still ongoing is the SDG 4, equitable, quality, lifelong education for all by the year 2030. We are just 7 years away. How are we faring? And especially, how about the people who touch my heart, those with disabilities, and especially those with visual impairment? The picture doesn't look too good. Now, when we come to Ghana, these are quite recent policies. Persons with Disability Policy, 2006, Ghana Education Act, 2015 Inclusive, and then the Education Strategy Plan 2018-2013. These were carved from the SDGs. And therefore, if we have the global policies in place and the national inclusivity policies in place, we have no chance of leaving anybody out. But the picture is quite different from what the books say. And so what I'm about to present is an amalgamation of about 3 studies that I've presented. I've successfully published on this cohort of learners. for want of time, I'm not going into boring anybody in the methodologies or ethical clearance. This is what the data says. So if you look to my right, pre-COVID-19 learning experiences, many of these visually impaired students had never utilized our learning management system. For them, when you talk about technology, software, it was about the software that enables them to listen to tests, the JAWS, which we use in my university. And when they go to we have a specialized laboratory for them in the building, which houses what you call the University of Ghana Learning Centers. There's a specialized room for all forms of disabilities. And so for them, technology and software is limited. Software is limited to the JAWS software. Technology is mostly what they find there. So now I've been interested in gauging the experiences from pre-COVID-19 because it's COVID-19 that exposed most of them to technology-enhanced learning, online learning. It was face-to-face, starting face-to-face all the time throughout. So these are some of the things. This is how I thematize their sentiments. When before COVID-19, the university will make available transport now to take them to and fro their hostels and lecture rooms and to write exams and all that. And then I've mentioned the software. The JAWS was available free of charge for them as long as you can buy your smartphone that accommodates that software. But you see, in the physical space, they call themselves the silent minority. Why silent minority? Because most of the lecturers still engage in didactic approaches where they go on and on and on and teach, pointing to diagrams that are being projected and describing things, forgetting that there are a few people within the classroom, the lecture room, who cannot see what is being projected. Now, the decision to shift online, of course, I've cited the Commonwealth of Learning documents in 2020, almost in every work I've done since 2020, that every country should find context-specific strategies to make sure that education loss is minimized. And therefore, the decision, and they also mentioned that the decision to move online was not, there was no time to plan, it was time for action. So most universities just moved. And so when I quizzed these people, they indicated straight away that it is one of the major challenges they face because they did not even hear of the announcements. All they heard was, we are going online. And so some of them referred to the decision as lopsided. But a few of them indicated it is a relief. And that is for only those who could afford digital devices in their homes. For them, it was a relief. And let's also be mindful, many of the students with disabilities, especially blind, many of them are from low SES families. And therefore, affording gadgets is a major hurdle. Now, what about the preparation? When it comes to the institution, there's a typo here, sorry. My right is personal. They had friends and family who could lend them their gadgets, who could teach them how to log on to Zoom and Teams and do things, and the software too. I mean, family and friends and those who had their gadgets, they have a problem. So on the individual level, sorry, my right is individual, the one with the two teams, sub-teams. But when it comes to my left side, the institutional preparation, the students indicate there was no preparation at all because it was just moving. They were not oriented, they were not trained. Then there was also a lack of policy. I'm talking about online learning policy. And of course, I've done another study comparing Ghanaian students with visual impairments with those from Egypt. And they both indicated that, findings from both institutions indicate that they were mere insertions in the existing face-to-face teaching and learning policies, which is not sustainable. And so they indicated that there's a lack of policy. And of course, I had the ODL institution in mind. ODL department here. we are yet to develop a policy. By the end of the year, it will be done by the kind courtesy of Commonwealth of Learning, who has given us some grant and an expert to develop. We have been in existence for since 2007. We have never had a policy to guide our work, but it's coming into play very soon. And then there are also inadequate digital technologies, especially when there was a lockdown and they had to be in their homes. It was virtually non-existent. Now, when those who manage to be online, what are the visually impaired students tag themselves as silent minority? Now, when it came to the virtual space, they now tag themselves as unseen silent minority, because at this point they could not even raise their hands. The instructors could not even see them. At least in the physical space, you could see there's a visually impaired student, only that you may be using didactic approaches that do not appeal to them. But now they were lost in the whole equation. They also admitted they had low digital literacy. Pedagogical approaches were exclusive. It did not cater for them. And again, there was no access to digital tools. So I wanted to explore their, preferred, their recommendations to sidestep these difficulties. They needed digital literacy training, and they indicated that it's not only them, the instructors also needed digital literacy training. And most of them opted for a hybrid. In fact, a few opted for full face-to-face. They didn't want to have anything with, virtual learning due to their bad experiences. And majority wanted a hybrid. And then also they wanted access to digital technologies. I don't know how many minutes I have, but this is my last slide. This encapsulates my conclusion, my recommendations, and it is captured in the lens of theory of care, that if we should really think of making openness a reality for students with visual impairments, then we should look at what some of these authors, theorists who have contributed to the theory of care, what they have propounded, that teaching is not merely passing information. The world has moved from didactic approaches, the banking system, to more student-centered approaches, more student-oriented, more practice-oriented, and therefore teaching should transcend information passing. Teaching should be mutually satisfying relationship. Constructivism should be at play. Whether the person is able or disabled, we should construct knowledge together, own knowledge. There should be alternative options for teaching, alternative options for assessments. We cannot go on examining people pen and paper, especially when we are operating in virtual space and then we have people with impairments. Then the pedagogy of care, that is same as the mutually satisfying. Then students' equity. Here we should move beyond just providing some form of multimedia. We have to have an amalgamation of multimedia that will appeal to every student, irrespective of disability or ability. And that's what we call multimedia. We should move from multimedia to multimedia to provide as many as possible the technologies that are available to accommodate these people and make their learning more meaningful. Access should be expanded. And in addition to that, I mentioned usability from the beginning. Then purposefully crafted designs and practices. That has to do with content. It has to do with pedagogical approaches. It has to do with the entire curriculum. And then equal levels of caring relationships. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your attention and for the opportunity to contribute. Prof. Van der Berg, over to you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Samuel. Without any to do, I'm going to ask Prof. Cosmas to do his presentation, and we'll do a brief wrap up at the end. Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Sam. Very interesting, thought-provoking. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Prof. Cosmas, are you ready?
He dropped, I'm sure, network challenges. Oh, Prof, is it possible
Yes.
for Prof Lebo to go?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, I agree. Prof. Lebo, if you are ready, please go ahead and present for us. Let's see, hopefully Cosmas will come back. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. I think I'm ready. Let me also share my screen, my presentation. Share. Are you able to see my presentation?
Yes, please.
I can see, but
Presentation
not
mode, okay.
yes.
Perfect.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay. Let me start. Good day, colleagues. I know many of us are already in the afternoon, and while others are still in the morning and maybe at night, perhaps. But good day to everyone, and thank you, Prof. Berg, for the introduction. I'm not going to introduce myself, and for the opportunity to co-present with you and also together with the team. My presentation is titled Open Educational Resources in the Global South. Before I move my slides, I want to believe all of us understand that open education has been prevalent for years, and its history can be traced back in the years with various movements and different various initiatives. However, as it has been indicated by Prof. Geesje and I believe Prof. Samuel, that openness encompasses a range of dimensions, each carrying inherent possibilities and challenges, especially when considered within a different or diverse context. Having said that, maybe we should ask ourselves, why open education practices? What are education practices, and why do we need to actually go the route of open education practices? Having said that, drawing from earlier definition, these OEPs, I will call them OEPs, that is open education practice. These are practices which support reuse and production of OER through or adhering to institutional policies. Basically, this is the fact that we'll use them, or we'll use them according to the different policies from different institutions. They will promote innovative pedagogical models, and also respecting and empowering students as co-producers of lifelong learning in their lifelong learning journey. So, as I indicated from this definition, is that these OEP practices are actually resources and content that are freely available to everyone without restrictions, reuse, or distribution, and also without significant financial or geographical barriers. Professors also indicated challenges in relation to cost and finances as well. But with open education practices, colleagues, it's a matter of moving beyond content-centered approaches in education that involves shifting the focus from merely just putting our content out there or having textbooks and materials that are not necessarily interactive, but we're trying to emphasize the importance of effective teaching practices and also active student engagement using all these materials. So basically the practice is about making sure that we are there, teaching practice are there to be more active, not necessarily just putting our materials out there without actually allowing students to engage with such materials or learning materials. So with this OEPs, this shift recognizes that education is not solely about what is taught, but also how it is taught and how students interact with the material. So as I indicated earlier, it's not about just putting the material out there without interacting with it. So with these open education practices, we are actually trying to it's about bringing innovative ways for educators and students to engage with open educational resources as amongst the resources that they can use to enhance teaching and learning and also for collaboration purposes. So basically the OERs are at the core of open education. So these OERs are there to assist in terms of creating, using and adapting them to enhance, as I indicated, the teaching. What I also want to highlight is that I've noticed, I've come across OERs that were adapted from various materials, but they were not necessarily created from the perspective of students, and that on its own, we cannot just remain by just adopting from various sources, but also or from various sites, but also create something that talks perhaps to our own context to be able to address the challenges that might be there with opening access to material. So as I indicated that in the Global South, education stems from our African context. We have a different context from the Global North, I want to believe, as much as we draw from the Global North, but also our context, I would say, also matters in this regard without making comparison. So hence, it is important that we always focus on our real life situations to make our content more understandable. We having explained that with open education resources, we are actually trying to bring in our own context that will talk to our own African context and also make it more understandable, as I indicated earlier on. So myself and Professor Berg, we are teaching in the Masters in Education, specializing in ODL. And we thought, and we actually thought, as we discussed between the two of us, that we need a material and that talks to our African context. And by looking at the material that we were using, we realized that the existing open access material that we are using in our structured master's program were not necessarily, or is not necessarily developed within our African context. So that brought the thought of coming up with an OER that will actually talk to our own context. Fortunately enough, there was a call from the South African directorate that talks to language resources, the Center for Language Resources, and together with the UNESCO Chair on Multimodal Learning and OER at the University of Northwest. Back then, it was led by our very own Dr. Jaco Olufir, and then who led this project that also made us to participate in the Digital Humanities OER Champions Initiative. So we started by initiating our own issues. What are our issues? And we realized that we wanted to address two problems. Firstly, as I indicated, the African context, OER that is contextualized in our own context. And secondly, as we noted that our students are from South Africa and others are from other African countries, then we need to also try to bring in issues that are pertinent to ODEL, but be able to actually bring in their own context as well. So we also wanted just one text that students can refer to for basic information in the field. As I noted before that the students are from other countries, but at the same time, we wanted to make sure that this also addresses their own challenges. Challenges being sometimes they struggle or they have difficulty finding information on issues such as definitions of ODL, theories of ODL, and also perhaps a history of distance education. But having one text in a form of an OER will actually assist them to use the same text for the 4 modules that are in the structured program, so that they can be able to use the very same OER that will, with information that cuts across all the modules in the program. So that is basically trying to come up with, the purpose was basically to make sure that the OER talks to our, what will information that will provide our students with more information and relevant information for them. So we initiated the process to our students, and we selected the students. By selecting the students, it means we actually looked at the cohort of 2021 and 2020, 2021, and 2022, and then we selected the student, and that made us to come up with a process that we can actually undergo to be able to start with the OER right up to where we get to the conclusion. So I want to share with you briefly what is it that we did to undertake the process of developing the OER, especially looking at the challenges of making education, material to be accessible to our students, as we are trying to also address the issue of openness. So first and foremost, we invited the students, as I indicated, that we selected the students based on their performance, based on their availability, and the engagements that they were involved in when we had our discussion forums and so on. So after inviting the students, colleagues, we had an information session on Microsoft Teams, and because when they attended the meeting, we initially provided them with different topics that they can choose from, that they are passionate about, that they want to share knowledge on, that they know that they will be able to impart knowledge to the current students and perhaps to the future generation as well. So the 2 of us drafted our own units, and we set them as a benchmark and shared with the students so that they can be able to know what is it that they can do in terms of drafting their OERs. So we send them the draft, but they also came with different ideas, innovative ways of their own units, and that also help them to actually share knowledge and also be creative, go back to the literature and read more. In a way, it was actually providing them with more information about the different content, as I indicated, definitions of ODL, and also history of education and other units that were listed as possible units for the OER. We came to the review process where we had to review all the OERs. We did this in this form. It was peer review amongst our the students themselves together with us. So we shared each other's units so that we can be able to give each other comments to be able to come up with quality units in that particular OER. We then moved to the second review, which is external review, that was done by an ODL expert who actually also guided us on how to improve our the content. Then finally, we as lecturers sat down and also did the final review, making sure that it talks to the good quality as we looked at the various units that we had. And as I indicated that with the invitation, we gave them all the necessary topics to choose from, and that on its own gave them confidence to be able to look for more information. And with the final review, we could tell that it was information, I mean, it was content that was actually created by students who are passionate about ODL and also who have different contexts and also brought in their own, their own context as well. We moved to language editing after we were happy about and satisfied about the final review. And we, fortunate enough, amongst the students, we have the student who has the skill of instructional design. The very same student assisted us with the design, and that also brought in another skill that we also learned from, and she also sharpened her own skill. Then we were happy about the document, and that was when we got to the completion part of it. And after completing the OER, what we did is that we submitted it to the UNISA repository. And at this stage, we are hoping that the very same OER will be shared with other or external repositories like OER Africa, MELO, and the others. So that is the process that we followed to make sure that we come up with we co-create the OER with our own students. So I would like to share with you our contextualized OER. I hope that it will be able to open. Okay, thank you. This is the learning material, and it's titled Theory and Practice in Open Distance E-Learning. It is currently in a flipped book form, but then there is also a PDF document that is also available. So maybe let me first thank the students who took the initiative to be part of this OER, sharing information, and without any problems, we avail themselves to be able to share with us their information and to also be able to share with the others. So I'm going to, okay, let me just do this, move this part. I'm going to, I'm going to share with you, I'm just going to open up this flip book so that you can be able to see what we actually did in this OER. So basically, as I said, it's the two of us who are facilitators together with the two co-presenters who also co-created the OER with us, and the other students. Some of them are also in this webinar, also part of this webinar. And as I indicated, one of them was the instructional design. So on the next page, you can see, colleagues, these are the units that were created or co-created together with our students, and we all helped each other to come up with this kind of work that we have now. So the importance of this OER or this document, it was a matter of bringing in our context, as I said, and you can see that this is created, not necessarily adopted from other learning materials. And just for me, if you allow me to just show you the example of the African context that we tried to bring in as well. I'm sorry for the noise. So if you can, the reflective activity, for example, it's showing our context that students can also bring in their context and be able to understand the content, as I indicated that this is the aim of making sure that we are bringing in our African context. You can see with the reflection activity that talks to technology in classroom based in, talking about South African use of technology in the classroom. Maybe you might ask ourselves why technology in the classroom in an ODL space, but because we have different students that are using their own different perspectives, this is why we have this kind of reflective activity. So this is basically how our OER is, and I want to now go back to my slides. Okay, before I go back to my slides, and maybe on the other hand, I need to also indicate that by this OERs, we are currently using it for the 2022 cohort since it has been finalized last year. And we are hoping to get feedback from the students so that we can be able to improve on this OER and be able to adapt it in a different way, or that will maybe suit the future practices of our education or the education system. And by having this feedback, definitely we will keep on improving it. And maybe I also need to share with you that the very same cohort of students, we came up, we actually submitted an article to the Journal of Learning for Development that is also hosted by COL, Commonwealth of Learning. So we hope that we'll be able to share with the rest of the world information on developing your own OER, and also the reflections that came from our students in terms of developing the OER, and also the fact that this OER has actually given us more information on how to develop more of this kind of OERs. Hence, we want to share with everyone what the process that we have undergone. I want to now get out of this and move to my slides. I hope I'm okay. So having said that, colleagues, in conclusion, as open education is evolving and it is an ongoing practice, we believe, and I also believe that ongoing practices of this kind contributes to a more inclusive, collaborative, and also a student-centered open education that will form future practices that will also bring in more access to education to everyone who is interested in it. As our previous president has said, that education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world. So I also say to all of us, by making education accessible to everyone, definitely it will assist us to change the world. On that note, I would like to also thank you for your listening to my presentation and for the opportunity from Commonwealth of Learning to provide, to also present to give my own contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lebo, for this interesting presentation and for sharing information on open education practices and OERs that can be co-developed by students. Thanks for this, much appreciated. I see Prof. Cosmas, are you ready to share with us your presentation? Thank you. Yeah, we can see your screen, still not in presentation. Perfect. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Prof. Berg, for this opportunity. And I also want to thank the Commonwealth of Learning for providing this platform so that we could interrogate the issue of openness. My presentation is on challenges of openness in the context of a dual mode institution. In the earlier presentation by Prof. Berg, there were issues that were raised regarding openness, which are also quite applicable to this presentation, like the issue of access. You know, the whole essence of open and distance learning is to enhance access to students and all potential students who may, for one reason or the other, not be able to study on a full-time basis. Then it is quite a necessary thing to open up the learning space. And we also need to evaluate where we are and look at where we want to be. So the issue of aspiration is quite important. There's something wrong with my slide, it cannot move. and I'll go to. So the main reason why students would opt for study using the ODL mode is because of some of the well-known features of open and distance learning. Issues of flexibility. Will they be able to go through an academic program in a flexible way? And this flexibility starts from the very admission. How do we admit students into an ODL program? Do we have a rigid structure in terms of admission requirements? Or we have admission requirements that really open up access? And how affordable is distance education? Are the students able to afford this? In my own context in the university, I'll talk about while the other students in face-to-face contact component of the university may get sponsorship from government. The students in the ODL institution, they do not get any sponsorship. So students have to fund themselves or look for other people to fund their education. So this now really questions issues of affordability to say, will the students be able to afford this, or there will be challenges with the funding? And as highlighted by my other co-presenter, Prof. Samuel, the issue of inclusion is also very important. Yes, we have students from diverse contexts with different needs and interests, and how do we include these students in our? Maybe before I proceed with this one, I may need to highlight a little bit. So I know we are all aware of what we mean by a dual mode institution, but the fact that I would want to highlight is that we are having a single institution that offers education in the face-to-face contact mode. And also the other part of the very same institution offers education through open distance learning. So you are literally running two systems in one institution. And what it means is that starting from management of the very institution, there has to be full understanding of both systems. Otherwise, if there is lack of full understanding of both systems, students in one of the systems may suffer, and then it affects completion rates, retention, and so forth. But if the systems are adequately understood and policies and practices do cater for the different systems, then that becomes fine for all the students. So the issue of inclusion is very important. And the other feature of distance learning in terms of openness is the issue of personalization. To what extent do we look at students as individuals and allow them to progress in an academic program as individuals with individualized attention and support? Then the use of technologies, post-COVID, now we have heightened issues of online teaching and learning. So how do we bring in the technologies? I think this is a point that was also raised by Prof in the earlier presentation, to say, with this digital divide, what are the implications of that to openness in a distance learning environment, especially in a dual mode institution? So with these features, we will be able to get a lot of students getting attracted to distance learning programs. However, operating a dual mode institution is a bit complex. Like I said, I did indicate that you are literally running two systems in one institution. So when you are running two systems in one institution, there's bound to be problems. normally the general regulations that are applicable to students will not differentiate the type of student to say, do these regulations really apply to distance education students or to full-time students? Yes, you may have some regulations here and there, but generally, these regulations are supposed to be applicable to all the students. Yet, like I indicated in my earlier slide, these students are diverse and they are operating in two different systems. So what may be useful for students in another system like the full-time contract may be different from the requirements of the distance education students. So if you don't have a set of regulations that are really applicable to distance education students, it may be a problem. Normally, the challenges that we have in some kind of a dual mode setup is, yes, we provide access to the students to come in and study through the distance education mode. But does that access result in success? Are the students able to complete their programs without any problem? Or maybe they may end up having to drop out of the programs. That has to be attended to. Then again, in a dual mode institution, you will have a common academic calendar because you want these programs to kind of run at the same time, examinations being written at the same time, all assessments and so forth. So it really becomes a problem for students in a distance education institute to be able to run with the common calendar, which may be a problem in terms of their needs. Then one element that is quite well pronounced in a dual mode institution is that there's emphasis on program parity. That if, for example, we have an LLB program, it is a program that is offered in the full-time, and it is also the same program that is offered to distance education students. And the only difference is the mode of delivery. But the content, the assessment standards, the assessment regimes, they're kind of the same because there's need to ensure that there's parity. But like I said, is this what is supposed to be done when we have students who have different needs, we have different expectations? So we may have a big brother attitude in a dual mode institution, because normally the distance education component may be regarded as the other aspect of the university. And in that regard, it becomes something that is given secondary priority. And the primary focus is on the face-to-face conduct element of the university, which really becomes a challenge. So in the end, there will be so much pressure that is exerted on these distance education students if they are meant to fit in a system that may not really accommodate them in terms of their interests. So some of the challenges, since my study is referring to a university in sub-Saharan Africa, which is a developing context, I think like Prof. Lebo mentioned, there are differences in terms of higher education provisioning in the global south as compared to probably what happens elsewhere. So in a context where there is lack of adequate funding, what are the implications of this to openness? Where there are insufficient resources, the actual books in the library, electronic books, devices that are needed for online teaching and learning. If these resources are not sufficient, what are the challenges and what are the implications for openness? Then these distance education students, they have to be multitasking because they need to fund their own studies. So they have to be involved in some other jobs to raise funds for the upkeep, possibly for the family. and also ensure that at the same time, they also concentrate on the academic studies. So that really exerts a lot of pressure on them. Then if the institution does also not have sufficient or effective student support systems, then some of the students may have challenges and will have a problem in finding assistance in terms of dealing with those challenges, which really becomes a problem. But if the support systems are okay, then it becomes easy for the students to always get assistance and then continue with their education up to completion. But the main emphasis is on after coming in, they have to be able to progress until graduation. Then if there are any costs that are incurred in the process in terms of other than just the tuition fees, there are other costs that are involved if the students go through the academic program. If these costs are too high, then it becomes a problem. Then one reflection, which is quite important in a dual mode institution in a developing context, is who provides distance education? Who is teaching the students? Do they understand distance learning? Do they understand the distance learner? Do they go out of their way to really assist these students as qualified, experienced, and even interested audio practitioners? So the capacity, the caliber of audio practitioners becomes a real issue, where maybe in the context of a dual mode university, teaching is mainly done by instructors from the other side of the university who are used to teaching face-to-face, full-time students in a contact setup. And now when you introduce new issues like how we want all the learning to be captured in an electronic module, how we want the learning to be done online, what are these expectations going to result in terms of the quality of the practitioners? So to what extent are the students themselves motivated and the instructors also motivated to work in an audio context? So there are so many intricacies, like I indicated, some which could be picked as I was discussing. If the academic programs are too rigid, there are no multiple entry and exit routes. If it's a 5-year program, it is rigidly a 5-year program. And after 2 years or 3 years, if the student decides to leave the institution, they may leave with nothing even after 4 years. But if there is maybe a modular approach where programs build to the next level and students are able to enter and exit at any level, it really becomes a move that is important in distance learning and in line with the whole essence of openness. Then the needs and the interests of the distance learners, to what extent are they catered for in a dual mode setup? When we talk of a student in such a university, what quickly comes into mind? Is that a full-time student or students in their different categories? It becomes a real challenge. I did talk about the digital divide and how it is a problem in terms of implementing online teaching and learning. I also talked about the caliber of course instructors. Then if the assessment approaches are also not flexible enough to accommodate distance learners, then it becomes a problem in terms of how we can realize openness in a dual mode institution, because the focus will be on a student that is on campus every day. And even the way we assess expectations and everything, they're all aligned to the full-time student that we expect to be on campus every day. But we need to understand what assessment is. I think I'll give an example of the program that Professor Lebo referred to pursue the Masters in Open and Distance Learning, I did enjoy going through that program because the assessments were really effective, yet you wouldn't have a situation where you sit for an examination. But we have too much emphasis on examinations at the expense of other effective modes of assessment, which are also important and are applicable in a distance learning environment. So as possible solutions, seeing that there are challenges of openness in a dual mode setup, there may be a need to de-link the distance education entity in such a university so that at least it exercises some form of autonomy where it runs with its own set of regulations, it runs with its own academic calendar. It also runs with its own assessment and admission regulations so that the whole essence of openness is understood and realized without any challenges to the students who may come into this kind of a setup and only to be disappointed when they realize that their needs and interests are not catered for. So there may also be a need for financial support and resource material support for distance education students so that at least the whole essence of openness is realized, because whatever challenges they have, if there are any ways of assisting them, then it will be a plus for them. I did talk about the issue of a modular approach to designing and implementing academic programs, where other than using flexible entry routes, they are also able to exit at any point of the academic program if for one reason or the other they feel they cannot continue, rather than just to leave at some point without any evidence that they have been to a university. So the issue of a holistic student support system is also very important, because without support for these students, we may have them in, but we may not be able to retain them, which then becomes quite self-defeating when it comes to the issue of openness. I think I have come to the end of my presentation. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much, Prof. Cosmas. This was very interesting, and as we discussed even before the presentation, I think we don't realize at an open distance learning institutions the challenges that go with a dual mode institution and all the unique challenges you're sitting with or challenges that you have to address, and you also came up with some possible solutions. So thank you for that. And if I look at all the presentations, it's interesting to see how the really promises of openness are there, and all the needs that are actually needed, or tools that are needed, support that is needed to support our students to work towards openness in education. Dr. Jaco, I am done. I don't know how we go forward. Would you like to facilitate the questions and answers? Is there still time, or how are we doing?
Yes, I think we can put some time to some questions. Dear colleagues, you're welcome to either pose your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and then I can give you opportunity to speak. Professor Geesje, I think there's already one question. Will these presentations be made available through some way? I don't know whether you've got a link or whether I can share it directly with the colleagues.
I don't think there will be a problem. Can we send the presentations to you?
Yes, no, you can send it to me and I will share it with colleagues. And the recording will of course, also be shared with the attendees. Any questions, colleagues? I see there's a couple of comments in the chat. I'm trying to go back and see if there's any question I've missed. I don't see any hands raised. Whilst we're waiting, I will pose one to you, Professor Geesje. Considering what has been mentioned now, I see there's a lot of colleagues here from institutions who are either just busy with open distance learning, but also working towards that. What would be your take to, within an emerging ODL environment, how do you bring in openness? How do you embrace open educational resources in an environment where it's not there yet? Are there any practical tips that you can give to colleagues, lecturers even, that want to start the process?
Thank you, Dr. Jaco. I think there are many ways, and one of it is communication. I just believe in working together and collaborations and cooperation. So if colleagues who are starting with such practices can contact even us or any colleagues that they know that have some experience, that's also always a good starting point. And of course, Prof. Lebo has shared one of the OERs that we have developed, and I know it's only one example, but there are many examples, and you and I have also discussed this. There are examples of open assessments, open curricula, etc. So I think the best is to look at good examples that I can think of. I don't know if colleagues can want to add on.
Dr. Jaco, if I were to come in, I just also want to talk to the issue of capacity building. As maybe institutions who are still trying to find themselves or establishing themselves, maybe it's important that academics should be capacitated in terms of openness and also open education practices, and also talking to the issues of OER by capacitating themselves, or the institution doing so. It will definitely assist them to be able to start with the process of developing their own OERs. And also maybe not to also have maybe more confidence in their students, that students can bring in more insightful information that can also help them to develop this kind of resources and tools. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see there's another question. This is more an ODL question rather than an OER one. But what are some of the gaps in ODL research? I don't know, any colleague can maybe answer. You are all ODL experts.
Right,
Perhaps,
if I should
yes, please go ahead. Yes.
Yes. The biggest challenge is what Prof. Cosmas highlighted. Though for those of us who are operating in dual mode context, the understanding of ODL is so far. You know, I've invited people, I started training instructors on innovative online pedagogies around May this year. And some don't see the need to even attend because they think they are lecturers. And so what is the need? You understand? So it's not only about research, it starts from even the practice. And the way our students are handled, assessed, is a big challenge. So in my context, and I believe in that of Prof. Cosmas, the basic understanding of the concept of ODL is nothing to write home about, let alone moving into the research. We see people see distance education as merely the correspondence between students at one point and instructors at one point. So there's a huge yawning gap that needs to be closed, which could be facilitated by research and also some of these activities we are engaged in. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Professor Cosmas, do you want to maybe add what, in your view, are the gaps in the ODL research?
Thank you very much, Jaco. I think what I can add is that the most important thing, the fundamental point, is to ensure that we have a pool of ODL practitioners who really understand their practice. Because what we have in most cases is people who are serving in ODL, but they are not practitioners in the actual sense. So for you to expect those people to carry out reflective practice, it becomes a challenge. So you can only reflect on your practice if you really understand what your practice is all about. So I think the starting point would be to develop the capacity of the ODL practitioners so that they become competent in what they are doing. Then as you develop that capacity, you also bring in the element of reflective practice so that in whatever they do, they have to be reflecting on it. And in a way, they can research and publish on whatever they would have found from. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, and I'm going to aim this at Professor Geesje. Someone has asked in the Q&A, how does the recent policy on articulation into and within higher education document released recently, how does it bear with this discussion? How does it impact the discussions we have here? Anything from your side on that?
Dr. Jaco, I have to admit that I'm not aware of this policy. I haven't seen it. I'm very sorry. I don't know if any of the colleagues have seen it, or maybe the person, Mariana, who was asked this, can give us more information about this. So I apologize.
I've seen it very briefly, and I don't think it necessarily plays too much into open educational resources. It will have an impact on openness, but what I can maybe add, and I can maybe give an opportunity to speak and maybe clarify. I know the Department of Higher Education and Training is very much committed in South Africa to micro-credentialing and recognition of prior learning. So there are some further developments that are taking place, and I'm also aware that regionally, within the SADC region, there are some interesting developments taking place around micro-credentialing, and that will definitely play into a more flexible approach when it comes to higher education. But they are not yet at a point of that being policy, and I think this is part of that bigger movement. But yes, I also cannot add anything more than what I mentioned just now. I think this document does not specifically relate to you know, the openness, but it will have an impact definitely. But let me see if I can open up a microphone. Mariana, if you want, you're welcome to quickly explain or give inputs from your side if you want.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. It just was very interesting to me that the CHE did release this recently, and I read through the document, and sorry for the background noise. It does provide a starting point more in terms of access and the articulation. It does not speak so much to openness, but they indicate very clearly that they're not going to give us a step-by-step guide, and that we should start as universities to explore the different kinds of articulation and access. There's so many definitions I have in this document of different kinds of access and articulation. And I think if we can use this kind of forum to start exploring that, because in South Africa, the 3 quality councils and their qualifications, the way that we must create articulation, and Professor's presentation spoke to a lot of the problems that we are facing. And I think if we start looking at this document that the CHE has worked on, it will help us a lot to actually start with this articulation process, and then come up with examples which this document refers to, that we must come up with the answers. They're not going to give us the answers, they are making the suggestions. So that's why it was interesting for me to think of how we can utilize this document in terms of these kind of discussions. Thank you, Jaco.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Prof. Geesje, I don't know whether you want to add to that, perhaps, or respond to that, rather.
Yeah, maybe just quickly adding a comment that I think it's high time that we are going the more flexible way and not be that restrictive. As I think I've said it in my presentation, otherwise technology will decide for us and open up education and we might become irrelevant. So I think we need to find flexible ways of micro-credentialing and different pathways than the strict ones that we are used to at the moment.
Yes. So I definitely agree with you, and that is actually the trend, even in the region. I mean, with the recent establishment of the Open University in Kenya, just shows you the importance of openness and open education. And I think in South Africa, that will definitely be the future for a number of the institutions. And of course, if I may plug Commonwealth of Learning at this point, you're welcome to also be in contact with me if we can support your institution in moving towards more ODL offering or working towards open distance learning policies. That is a part of our mandate, is actually to help face-to-face institutions bring that in and strengthen that. We are working in a number of the institutions represented here in any case today. One last question, I'm going to close with that, dear colleagues. Boning Hakane has asked here, how do you ensure that teaching and learning in open distance education is safe and secure, in particular to female learners? Anyone who wants to respond to that? How to ensure teaching and learning in open distance education is safe and secure, in particular to female learners? Anyone?
Okay, let me try to give it a shot. I'm not really sure why the question is skewing towards females, but I think I'll look at it holistically. And my colleagues have mentioned what do you call it? Capacity building. You know, in recent times, I've been engaged in some research on ChatGPT, and it's clear that those of us from the global south, we are laggards. We don't normally accept technology as quickly as our partners in the global north, and also not entirely our fault, because the technologies are not readily available as and when they are developed. It takes a bit of time, and therefore we need to build the capacity of both instructors and then students on how to utilize these digital tools in learning. And also, I think, is it Prof. Van den Berg who mentioned netiquette? We take it a lot for granted because apart from the utilization of technology, we have also not mastered the art of teaching in virtual space or learning in virtual space. There have been instances where you hear students literally insulting instructors and they don't even know their mic is on. We've had instances where if a female in my classroom appears in a singlet, it's cool to tell him to get into something appropriate. But there have also been instances where females forget themselves and you see nighties and all that in virtual space and they don't even know their cameras are on. You have to quickly act. So this question boils down to me to two major things. One, capacity building in the ODL space, and two, netiquette in both fronts, the instructor and then the student, and any other issue will be covered. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Samuel. Any other final comments on that? All right, colleagues, I see that there's more questions, but we have almost run out of time. We aimed to work within an hour and a half, and I don't want to keep colleagues very much longer. Professor Geesje, if you can maybe give the final word from your side, and then we can close.
Thank you, Dr. Jaco, and thanks again to you and to COL for this opportunity and this discussion. I think these kinds of discussions are so needed within the open distance learning space. And thank you for providing this space this afternoon and for the four of us to present. And thank you for everybody for attending. I think we have touched on a few issues that we really can't leave as they are. We need to work further on them and discuss them further, and I hope in your different spaces you will do so and keep the conversations on openness going. Thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you, Professor Geesje van der Berg. Colleagues, all the best to you, and let's keep the discussion going on open distance learning and openness and open educational resources. All the best.